Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I'm here again with Joe Corallo. How are you doing?
I'm all right, Perch. How are you?
I'm doing great, and we have the great privilege of being joined by Jim Zub today. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You know, I've been excited to talk to you for a long time, certainly about your work, and I'm going to start in a kind of a weird place. I want to just say I really appreciate your site and your blog. You're one of the most transparent. I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do. You lay out stuff that I'm really thankful you do. I wish more people.
Thanks. Yeah. So to give people, I guess, a little bit of background if they don't know, on my website, which is jimzub.com, I've got a lot of tutorials, and over the last 8 or 9 years, I've posted up a lot of information on the financials of kind of comic creation, how to pitch stories in ways that have worked for me, and all kinds of this behind the scenes stuff. Because I didn't see a lot of that when I was getting going, and I feel like a lot of those questions are very common. And so I thought, A, this helps me to kind of organize it in my head, and B, when I'm not writing comics, I'm a teacher. So I'm a professor at this college called Seneca. I teach in their animation program. I actually used to run the program as the coordinator. So I would do all the curriculum development, the organizing with the instructors, and building stuff. It's all structure and, trying to put structure to creative things, trying to plan things out in a way that feels logical to these students. And so I can't kind of help it. I always want to organize and codify and kind of break things down into bite-sized pieces. And so when I finally started getting traction with my comic writing, I started doing the same kind of thing, because people would tweet at me and they would ask me questions, and I would realize, well, this is not 140 characters. So I would write a little blog post, and in my head that was like, well, the good news is if I do it really well once, I never have to write it again. I just have to send people that link. They go, well, how did you get your book and image or whatever? Well, here's a thing about pitching, or here's what editors really want to see, or this is, kind of the broader picture from my experience, and this is what I know about this thing. And so, I just feel like that was a better use of my time. Yeah, and it's been really, honestly, very heartwarming having dozens of comic creators over the years tell me that they figured stuff out because they read those posts, or at conventions they will bring me their books, and give me a book and tell me that I helped them on that path, and that means a lot to me. I just want people to make great stuff. I want them to make the books and the projects that they're passionate about, and some of these pitfalls are so easy to avoid once you know what they are. And some of them seem like real common sense, but if you haven't gone through it, it isn't,
Yeah. Speaking of image too, with Skullkickers, how'd you end up hooking up with Edwin? Because what was it? I know him through Danny Luckert, who I used to self-publish comics with, and they both went to SVA together, so that's how I knew him.
Yeah. I mean, Skullkickers really did change the kind of course of my career. Before that, I was working in comics. My first comic book stuff was honestly web comics. It feels weird because they're very different kind of periods of my creative career, and some people know me from each one. So 2001, I graduated school. I was working in animation, and the job was very toiling away on traditional animation stuff and things like that. And so in the evenings, I started doing a web comic for fun, as just hey, this is my own creative project I have more control over and things I want to do. Hand built the website and just started posting these little pages up 3 times a week. And at the time, 2001, web comics were really coming into their own, PvP and Penny Arcade. And there were a lot of people doing these very newspaper style strip comics, and I was doing a narrative, I had a dramatic story that I wanted to tell, and so it was very different than what a lot of other people were doing. And after a couple months, 3 or 4 months of it, Scott McCloud reached out to me, and he was like, hey, this is really, the way he reached out was hilarious. I was stopping for Christmas, and it's hard to explain some of this stuff to people, the nascent internet, right? At the time, there weren't even RSS feeds or things like that. If people stopped coming to your website, or they didn't think you were updating anymore, you were dead in the water. Right. And so you would post updates, and you would, even if you didn't have a new piece of art, you'd be like, no, there's stuff coming coming Friday, come back or whatever.
It's live. Yeah.
Right? The site, I'm not dead, and I had posted an update that said I'm going to take a 2-week break for the holidays. Please come back in January. I know sometimes I don't update as much as I should, but I'm trying. It's like that classic, just self, destructive kind of artist nerves, whatever. And Scott emailed me and he said, the strip's great. Don't get uptight. You're doing fine. And I was just like, oh my God, Scott McLeod just emailed me. And so I emailed him right back and he sent me his phone number and we jumped on a call and he was just delightful. And I don't know if you've ever met Scott or interacted with him. He's like everyone's comic book uncle. He's the greatest. So supportive and so like non-judgmental. Like whatever you're making, he's happy to see it. He just wants more people making stuff. And that was like my template for encouraging and joyous kind of comic creation. And so he introduced me to some other people who were making stuff on the web and we started talking back and forth. And then Scott said, man, I really feel like webcomics are coming into their own in 2002. You got to come to San Diego Comic-Con. And I was like, there's no way I could go to Comic-Con. That's insane. Like I don't have a badge. I don't have anywhere to stay. I can't afford a flight. Like at the time I hadn't been out of school very long. I had debts up to my eyeballs and, freelancing, like it just wasn't going to be possible. And then slowly but surely we knocked down the dominoes. Scott, this is a different time. I have to try and explain this. Scott got me a pro badge just by asking for one. Like he just said, no, Jim's a professional. And they went, oh, all right. And they put me on the pro list because Scott McLeod said so. Yeah. And then, he introduced me to a group of people who were getting their start and some of them lived in San Diego. And they were like, yeah, we got crash space on our couch. Now you got somewhere to stay. And I was like, okay, 2 down. I still can't go. And I was trying to explain this to my brother. We grew up big comic book fans and everything else. And he was just like, I can't believe this is happening. I'm like, well, it's not happening. I'm not going. It's cool. Everyone's being super nice, but there's no way I can do this. I'm not even making money on this webcomic or anything. And my brother called up my dad and he said, Jim's got a career opportunity and he's not going to take it. You have to help him. And so my dad bought my plane ticket to San Diego. Wow. And I flew down there. And this is the internet where people are like, you met someone on the internet? How do you know they're not going to kill you or dump your body at the side of the road?
GeoSteve was very safe. So.
Right. And so I'm flying to a city to meet people I haven't met before. Someone says they're going to pick me up at the airport. I don't know what they look like because there's no smartphones. Like it was just weird, but amazing.
That feels like a charming time.
It was incredible. And so someone picks me up at the airport and takes me around the city and I crash on someone's couch and like, it was wild. It was an amazing, week. And I got to meet all sorts of really wonderful people, very supportive. And it was like, man, comics, this is so cool. And one of the things I loved about Scott was he was so non-judgmental. When I met him in person, I walked over to his table and he was having a conversation with Chris Claremont. Mm-hmm. And I knew exactly what Chris looked like. So I was like, oh, damn. And Uncanny X-Men in the 80s is my gold standard for like great serialized entertainment and drama, like the purest kind of version of the comics that I grew up on. Yeah. And I was a little starstruck and like, oh, geez. And Scott looks up, sees my badge and goes, oh, Jim. And he goes, come on over here. And he introduces me to Chris, but he does this like, Chris, do you know Jim's work? Chris Claremont is looking at my badge, looking at me with this like kind of a little bit fear in his eyes, like, oh crap, I don't know who this guy is. And he goes, I'm really sorry, I haven't had the pleasure. And I'm like, no, Mr. Claremont, there's no possible way you would know who I am. Scott's just being very nice. And Scott goes, now, Jim, don't you talk down about your work. You're making comics. We're all comic creators here. And that was the baseline, It was incredible.
Stories we've ever heard.
Right? It was so good. It was so amazing. It was incredibly amazing. So a really cool week. I ended up going back home and just being like electrified. Like I wanted to make more comics. I wanted to do more stuff. And when my animation job at the time, I was in Halifax, Nova Scotia, kind of wrapped up there. I moved back home to Toronto. I didn't move back home, but I moved back to Toronto. Mm-hmm. And I started working with the Udon studio. Yeah. So one of the guys I went to school with, he was already there, Omar Dogan, and he was doing artwork on a bunch of, like, at that time, Udon was sort of like a little bit of everything. They were doing a lot of artwork for Marvel. They were doing a lot of coloring. They were doing a bunch of ad artwork and design work. video game and toy design stuff, a little bit of animation storyboarding. It was just like this
digital studio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the majority of the gang were in Toronto proper. And we literally worked out of Eric Koh's parents' house because his parents lived in Hong Kong, but they had a house in Toronto. And Eric, one of his duties was to make sure the place didn't fall apart while they were gone, like 10 months of the year. And so we just kind of had the studio in the basement there. And so there was like a big screen TV and a pool table and like 10 drafting tables and a bunch of computers. And, you know, Eric paid the power bill and the internet bill, and everyone just worked on stuff.
Wow.
And right in the midst of that, they got the license to do the Street Fighter comics.
Yep.
And that was when the studio kind of really flexed and started building stuff on their own.
They got to ride that first kind of manga wave a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, artists, you know, from the studio, like Arnold Sang and Alvin Lee went on to very big, you know, kind of things. Like Arnold is the lead character designer on Overwatch. Mm-hmm. You know, like Alvin is working on League of Legends, and like the studio had an incredible, you know, lineup of artists over the years, and we got to work with Capcom. And the more the comics that we did, the more they trusted us to work on toy design stuff and video game art and design work. And then the relationship got so good that we started publishing their art books in English. And that turned into a whole other part of the company where we became a publisher. And now that's what Udon's known best for, is manga and art books. And so while Eric was sort of managing the publishing end of things, I would eventually move on to become a project manager for creative services, as we called it. So it was custom comics and ad illustration and design work, movie concept art, all kinds of different things. And I learned so much on an editorial level and an art directing level and a project managing level when I was there. And it was like the best like comic education or publishing education I could have ever had, because I learned how conventions work. I learned how editorial worked. I learned how pre-press worked. It was all this, not the sexy stuff, not the creative stuff, but it was still very valuable, you know, and it changed the way I looked at the business.
Yeah. Do you think, Joe and I have talked with a lot of people, and one of the kind of recurring themes that we get is the kind of this split of a decent amount of mentorship and teaching and kind of learning the business, not just the one niche part of the business you're in,
right.
Other parts. And then kind of one of the transformations that happened, and we're trying to put our finger on it, but over the last 20 years, there seems like a lot of that is in short supply.
Yeah, I think it's easy to look at the current system and say that people aren't getting that education because it's so diffused with the people are working more remotely. Do you know what I mean? It used to be, you know, in the 80s or 70s, 60s, you had to be in New York City, right? So you were going to get mentorship because you knew the guy who knew the guy who was going to introduce you to the editor or whatever.
Osmosis kind of does.
Right?
Just in the air. Yeah.
And so now it's like there are little pockets of knowledge, but you're right that it's not being disseminated out quite the same way.
It's again, I you know, and I apologize to keep going back to it, but your blog and the things you've done. I mean, I have vivid memories in 2019 Emerald City Comic Con sitting with two, you know, the names, creators, I should say here, and we're looking at your blog post about taxes. And
the most dry stuff, yeah.
But I'm like, this is important. We're having a little argument, and I pulled up your website, and I'm like, no.
This guy talks about taxes. Get ready for the excitement. You know?
Yeah, it's just we have some whiskey, and now we're going to talk about why you guys need to do what's being
But the thing is, I wouldn't post about this stuff if I didn't get so many questions about it, or if people didn't seem so out of their depth on it. Like, I would work with some of these artists at Udon, and a lot of them were very responsible and reasonable. But every so often, we get a freelancer who's very talented on a creative, artistic level, and they were just a complete mess financially, and not because they couldn't. Like, they just couldn't hold on to money, and it would be tax time and they would be freaking out. And we're like, didn't you put money aside all year? And they were like, no, man, I've got a gym membership and I did this and I did that. And I was like, well, there's your problem. Well, can you guys advance me? You know, so then, and I was just like, this is brutal. Like, why are you doing this thing? Or, you know, aren't you writing off the stuff you buy? And they're like, just completely, bamboozled.
No,
They think that's a business expense must mean you're a business. You're like, you are a freelance artist. That is a business, and just people not knowing what they're supposed to be doing on that front,
Well, yeah, and it's hard not to get frustrated. I mean, I know that I sometimes let the frustration kind of seep through. I'm like, come on, you got to know this. You got to know this.
I think it's easy on the other end of it, as always. It's easy on the other side. Like I try when you're teaching, and I teach a new set of students, every 8 to 12 months, and they come in the door. There are moments where you're teaching those basic lessons again, drawing lessons, but also organizational lessons and good methodology in terms of communication and all that stuff. And you think to yourself, why do they never get it? You go, no, this is the first time they've heard it.
Yeah.
In my head, I'm like, these kids never get it. You're like, no, this is a completely new set of students. And you have to kind of roll your own brain back to that mentality and go, look, I have to be exuberant and excited about teaching them and bringing them into good, proper habits and all that kind of stuff, and show them why it matters. Because I think one of the other big mistakes is that people will say, do it like this. And the response is, why? Well, for these reasons, or here's an anecdote that makes it very clear what is on the other side of doing it wrong. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the more professional examples you can give them, the more it will stick in their head, because it's no longer an abstract of, yes, do what you're told, I'll be a mindless drone. It's like, no, you want to avoid this bad situation. And therefore, that's why you do it this way. And so it's weird. It's a weird thing, and then to translate those habits to my own professional career.
It's tough. I mean,
it is.
I appreciate the data, and there's so much bad information out there. I think there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out the comic industry. They don't have insight, so they kind of make up their own theories, and it's very easy to get a very warped view. You go to your comic shop. Hey, there's 100 copies of this one comic on the shelf. It must mean that the comic shop retailer was tricked somehow, and they're
or the opposite end of it, where someone is like, well, if this book's still being published, everyone must be making oodles of money, or
exactly,
or just because you're working on a major character for a major company, you must be making tons of money. And it's like, potentially, yes, but your financial situation can vary wildly. And it's not to say that I am poor, because I am not. I'm not banging a tin cup or anything like that. Comics have been very good to me. I think it also gets awkward because people look at some of those blog posts where I'm talking about my creator-owned book just barely getting by or being in the red for years, and they're like, "Why would you do this?" And it's like, you're looking at one chunk of data in isolation. Yes. Like, so Skullkickers is a perfect example of that. And this is where I was sort of, perfect. We need to get to anyways, right? So I was at Udon, I was project managing, and I enjoyed the work, but it is also very, I don't want to say soul crushing, because that's not the proper description. Sure. It's hard. You are making stuff for other people on their timeline, on their budget, to their spec. And you're doing this relentlessly with very little creative input. Particularly if you're the project manager. So you're the go-between. And the most communication you get is when things go wrong. When things run smoothly, you're kind of invisible. When you're doing your job extensively, that's when you're trying to make repairs or fix things or furiously work behind the curtain so you can step out and make it look easy, right? And so I learned a ton, but I was not being really creative anymore. Just tiny little pockets of, they need this. They're not sure what they want. And then you provide that little bit of creative structure. Or you say, what if we did it this way? Or they go, we don't know what art style we want. We go, well, what about this cool stuff? And they get really excited. And then you just get those little sparkles. And you go, remember when you did creative stuff? Yeah. Remember when you wanted to make things? And I was like, oh man, I can feel this detritus building up and frustration, not because of anything anyone is doing wrong, but because I'm not activating that part of myself anymore. You know what I mean? Yeah. I had been years since the webcomic had wrapped up. I was making really good money as a project manager at Udon, and I'd been paying down all my debts and down payment on a house and like all those things you're supposed to do.
Responsible things.
Yes, I'm a responsible adult in a creative career, no less.
Yes.
The teaching stuff started up, and I started off part-time, and then that built to a point where they really wanted me to stick around to help administrate the program. So all of a sudden I have these two kind of parallel careers going, but neither of them are hyper creative. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I was sort of desperately beneath the surface, kind of, what am I going to do? When am I going to get this thing going? One of the artists I work with was this guy, Chris Stevens, and he's an amazing illustrator. He does a lot of cover art now, but he does a lot of just commission work and things like that. He was doing a lot of role-playing game artwork. He and I had done a bunch of work at Udon together, and he was approached by Joe Keating, I believe, to do a short story for Pop Gun. Pop Gun was that Image anthology, and it was sort of this like brick, real big, thick book full of short stories. Some of them were as short as a page. Other ones were like 8-10 pages and what may have you. And so he contacts me because he had been doing a lot of work with me, and I was giving him a lot of steady work at Udon. And he said, this editor at Image got in touch with me. They want me to do something for an anthology. I was like, yeah, it's great, man. He goes, am I allowed to? I'm like, hey, you're not on an exclusive with us. Like, as long as you're not missing deadlines, do what you want to do. And we were chatting back and forth. I said, this will be fun. He's like, great, man. I'll let you know how it goes. I'll send you some of the art. I'm like, I'd love to see it. And like a day later, he calls me and he goes, they want me to make up whatever I want. They don't have a script for me. And I was like, that's amazing. What are you going to do? And he's like, I have no idea. And so over the phone, we started chatting and we kind of brainstormed up a thing. And I just, and at the end of the phone call, he was laughing. And I said, yeah, do something like that. And it was like a fantasy story, but kind of, self-deprecating and ridiculous and sarcastic, because he didn't want to do your standard kind of, medieval fantasy thing. Mm-hmm. And then a day or two after that, he contacts me again and he goes, I tried to make the story, put it together, and it was way funnier when you said it on the phone. Do you just want to write it? And I was like, yeah, man, that'd be cool. And that night, I just like voraciously poured myself into this script, and I was like, this is so much fun. This is what I've always wanted to do, just write amazing, cool comic stories. Mm-hmm. So we did a 10-page story. He did it fully digitally painted. We sent it on to Joe. Joe was just over the moon on it, thought it was great, showed it around to everyone at Image. And Eric Larson, who was publisher at the time, reached out and was like, this looks awesome. You guys should keep doing this stuff. And we were like, oh, that would be great. And Chris is amazing artist, but he would have these periods of incredible productivity, and then, like his own, like he would have problems and, life problems and financial problems and all kinds of different stuff was getting in his way. And so he contacted me and he said, that was an amazing experience. I don't think I can do it again. And I was like, what do you mean? They want us to do more. They're going to do another volume of Pop Gun. We've got to. And he's like, I don't have it in me, man. That almost killed me. That was so much work. And I was like, no, but look how good it is. And look how great we did on it. And he was like, well, I can't do 10 pages. I was like, can you do 3? And he's like, you can't tell a story in 3 pages. I'm like, want to bet? And so I put together a short story for Pop Gun Volume 3 that was a 3-page story that he did. And that got him really pumped, and he was really excited about it. And so we contacted Eric and said, can we pitch a miniseries? And Erica's like, just send it to me. So I put together the pitch that weekend. Chris did some character sketches. And within a couple of weeks, we had a green light at Image. Yeah. And I couldn't believe it. I was over the moon. And
that's one of the faster tracked projects I've heard.
Yeah, it was wild. And so I thought, this is going to be amazing. And then we just slammed into a brick wall because Chris was, doing a full monthly book is incredibly difficult. There's no way we were going to be able to do it fully painted. So we were going to have to change up the style. It was going to be more line art. We were going to bring in a colorist and the whole 10 yards. So we had to kind of source that stuff out. But on top of all that, Chris needed to make enough money to pay, keep the lights on, but also do get enough work done. And it just wasn't coming together. There were all sorts of other things going on in his life, and they were totally reasonable. And I had no problem with that. It was just, okay, and Image has once you're on the system, it's like, well, you tell us when you're ready and we'll solicit it. And I knew enough. I knew the publishing end of it. We couldn't just have one issue done and then, fall off a cliff. I wanted to have 2 or 3 in the can minimum. Sure. So that for a 5-issue miniseries, we weren't going to fail.
Yeah, you weren't going to try and recreate like 1993.
Right, exactly.
Yes, perfect.
You know, and I was like, I know this stuff. I've seen it from the other side, and I know how frustrating it is as a reader. So we just kept kicking the can down the road, and it was like, I don't think this thing's ever going to get done. Like, you know, it's taken us months and months and months, and we don't even have one issue in the can. And so we hit a point where I, you know, kind of had a heart-to-heart with Chris and said, I don't think this is happening. And he was like, yeah, I don't think it's happening either. And I just put it in a drawer, and it was like, we're never doing this book. And it was heartbreaking, but, you know, that just seemed like the way it was going to roll. And then months later, Edwin was a really big fan. Edwin Huang was a really big fan of the Udon gang and the Street Fighter artwork. Yeah. And he voraciously collected the books, and he reached out to the studio to show his portfolio. And I was, as the project manager, I was the guy getting all those portfolios and giving people the, you know, feedback, usually the standard cut and paste response of, thank you, we're not currently looking for anyone, or whatever. And I looked at his stuff, and his samples were good. He was making a couple really classic mistakes, like not leaving enough room for dialogue, and you know, but the actual panel-to-panel storytelling was solid. The drawing was solid. This kid, and he was like 19, had total potential. And so I responded to him with a, you know, real letter, like, this is great. Please, you know, can I give you some feedback? And he was voraciously excited. Yes, yes, yes. And I said, look, you know, are you working from a script? Because I don't know how much dialogue's on this page, but there is not, you could barely fit a single word balloon on this page you put there. And he goes, oh no, I'm just making up the story as I go along. And I was like, you need to work from a real script. And he said, well, can you send me a Street Fighter script? And I'm like, I'm not allowed to send you any of our work for hire stuff. That's all internal. Literally the only script that I have is Skullkickers. And so I said, I can send you this script if you want to see how a script is put together. And I can send you the first half of the pages that are drawn, and you can get a feel for how this guy Chris works and just, you know, learn from it.
Yeah.
And they were all pencil, but none of it was inked. And he said, well, I need to practice my inking. Do you mind if I ink some of these pages on my own? You know, I'll send them the high-res scans or whatever. And I said, fill your boots, man. Like, go for it. And so, like, 2 weeks later, he'd inked half the book, and he'd started penciling the second half. And I was like, what is going on? Like, what is going on? This is crazy. Like,
I love the initiative.
Yeah, it was incredible. And so all of a sudden, I'm getting pages again, and he's sending me thumbnails, and this is, you know, how he wants to put together the back half of the book. And I was like, okay, I mean, this is great. And so we got on a phone call for the first time. I talked to him on the phone, and I was so nervous because I wanted to ask him to be the regular artist on the book. Because I actually sent the pages to Joe Keating, and Joe was like, oh my God, Chris is drawing again. I said, this isn't Chris. This is this other kid, this guy Edwin, you know? And it was crazy. And so I get on the phone with Edwin, and Edwin's super nervous, and I'm super nervous. And we talk about other stuff. And then all of a sudden Edwin goes, if you wanted me to finish the rest of the book, I'd be really proud to do it. And I was like, oh my God, that's all I want you to do. Like, will you be the artist on this book? And he said, so here's the funny part. I talked to my teacher because he was still in school. And he said, they're okay with me making this my final project.
Everything's winning here. Yeah.
Right? And so all of a sudden we were back in production. I called Chris up and I said, I got an artist. And he's like, oh, thank God. I felt so guilty. And I said, will you do covers? And he said, it'd be my pleasure. And I was like, great. We were back on. And so by that time, Eric Larson was no longer publisher at Image. Eric Stevenson was. Mm-hmm. And I was so nervous that Eric Stevenson was going to shut us down. Because I don't know.
After everything falling in place, yeah.
Right. And so I contact Eric Stevenson, so nervous. And I'm like, hey, Eric, look, I know, you know, this isn't your project, but Larson liked it. And we've had this bump, and it's been probably a year since I sent anything, but here's a bunch of stuff. And is this cool? You know, let me know if there's anything else you need. And I got this like real short and sweet little, yeah, man, we'll get you on the schedule. And I was just like, holy crap, we're making a comic. You know? And I had made so many comics and projects at Udon, but there was this different level. There was this sense of, this is mine, this is ours, we own it, and we control it, and it's going to be exactly what we want, you know?
And it would go for a while. Like, so did I hear you right? You said that it was like 5 issues?
It was supposed to be 5 issues. Yeah. And we lucked out. Our timing was really quite fortuitous because Image was going through a bit of a renaissance.
Right.
Like Chew had come out and Morning Glories and a couple other titles in and around there. That were getting buzz. Walking Dead was definitely like, it was a TV show. It was just, it hadn't premiered yet. Yeah, so everyone was on this sense of like, the next hot thing is going to be an Image book. And so all these Image #1s were selling very well for completely unknown creators. People were getting really hyped about indie books again. And we were riding this wave. And so, our initial orders on that first issue, I think initial orders were like, don't quote me on this, I think they were like 4,000 copies. And then between that and FOC, we got like 7,000 or 8,000 copies, like almost double.
Wow.
And Eric was like, 8,000 is not great, but considering where you started and no one knows who you are, that's amazing. Like, good on you, And this, you'll be able to survive as a mini series and then get the trade out. And that's the important part.
You also seemed, I think it benefited I may have the timing a little bit wrong here, but RPG kind of content was starting to also, I don't want to say become cool, but it was getting in people
like Critical Role and stuff like that.
Oh no, this is this is 2010, right? So
it's a little early then, yeah.
Yeah, it's early on that. There's not even a lot of fantasy comics in the market at that time. Like there's some, but there's not very many. I laugh because IDW launched their Dungeons and Dragons series with John Rogers writing it, and I was like, I just want to sell more than D&D, which was never going to happen. But in my head, I was like, wouldn't that be cool? And then we launched, and the book instantly sold out, and we did a second printing, and that instantly sold out, and we did a third printing, and it was like, okay, here we go, like it's happening. And so as soon as we got that momentum, and we did like 2 or 3 printings of issue 2. We did 2 printings of issue 3. Eric was like, do you want to keep this going? And I said, yes. And so we instantly went into a format where we were going to be an ongoing. Because we had never announced it was a miniseries. We had just said #1,
Yes, the classic publisher stealth approach.
Right? Yes. And so issue 6, I put together anthology style with a bunch of my friends doing short stories so we could just stay monthly. And then, by the time 6 came out, 7 was ready, and we were able to keep it going.
Wonderful.
And so it wasn't monthly all the way through, and we would end up having gaps later on just because of freelancing stuff and production and what may have you. But we did 34 issues of Skullkickers over the course of those 5 years.
And 5 or 6 trades, right? Out of
6 trades.
6
trades, yeah. And that book, put me on the map in a whole different way because it proved to people I could be a writer, not just the project manager guy. And that I could write this book and put out a quality product on time. And at Image, I got a really good rep because I had done pre-press and all that stuff. Most of the books that go through Image go to their design team, and you generally want to have as close to a final book as possible, but there's always little hitches and stuff that needs to get nudged and ready. And I knew all that stuff because I had been helping to do that at Udon. So I could give them a turnkey finished book. And so Image was like, oh, if Jim's on it, you barely have to look at it. Like it's already going to be in all the specs we like, on the templates we like, color corrected and good to go. And so at Image, I was just like, no hassle. And so I feel like even though financially the book was always riding this razor's edge, Image was doing great as a whole. And they were like, but the book comes in on time and everyone's, likes it internally as well. And so we were never like a drag on the system, if that makes sense.
Oh, no, completely. Yeah. I think people, there's a lot of misunderstandings, I think, about Image and how they sit and how they fit. And if you can get into this sweet spot where you're not pulling them backward.
Right.
That's kind of your first big win.
And we weren't getting an advance or anything like that. So we weren't a financial drag on them. As long as we could cover our printing costs, we were kind of, value neutral.
Yeah.
But it was another title coming out in and around that time. And the trade actually, Eric convinced me to go $9.99 on the first trade. And those $9.99 trades were flying. Like the print runs were huge for us. you know, and so we weren't making good money on the trade, but we were getting in a lot of locations, and we were getting on a lot of, we ended up on one of those like teen reading lists and stuff like that. And the particular review we got said, this is for, you know, boys who don't think they want to read. And because it was fun, slam bam kind of entertainment stuff. And so we got good library pulls, we got good coverage in stores.
We're getting crossovers into different kinds of conventions. I mean, Gen Con places like that are promoting.
Exactly. A good friend of mine was already doing Gen Con really regularly. And so when the second trade came out, I got an introduction from Tracy Hickman, the fantasy author, and he shared a booth with a good friend of mine. And that year, just luck of the draw, Tracy didn't have a book coming out. So it's like San Diego. If you ever give up your booth space, it's gone forever. You'll never get it back. And so they were going to ride this booth reel on the razor's edge of profitability, but they'd do much better if they had a third that year. And so Howard contacted me, my buddy Howard Taylor, and he said, you know, do you want to be 1/3 of our booth at Gen Con? And I was like, oh my God. He's like, you know, huge D&D audience. You'll do real well with Skullkickers. I'm like, how many copies should I bring? And he said, how many can you bring? And I said, well, the most I've ever sold at one convention was when we launched the first trade at Emerald City. We sold 200 copies or something like that. And he was like, bring 300 copies. And I was like, we will never sell 300 copies of the trade. And he said, you're driving down, just throw them in your trunk. I was like, okay. And so I went down, and Gen Con's 4 days. And it was, I don't want to over dramatize it, but it felt like it was viral. The first day we sold terrible. Like, I think I might have sold 20 copies, and I thought, well, you know, that ain't bad. And then the next day, the way Gen Con works is people go to that show to play games. But when they're waiting for their next game, they're just sitting around chatting, or they're browsing, or they're shopping, or they're waiting in line to do demos or things like this. They're waiting in line, they got that book, they pull it out and they read it, and they start laughing. And they're like, this is great. And so people online are like, what are you reading? You've also got to keep in mind, most role-playing game books are $20, $30, $40. I had a $10 trade. And so I would have people come to my table on the second day, and they were like, I read this, I love it, I want to buy copies for my players. How much is it again? At $10. Okay, $50 is 5 copies. And I'm like, $50 is 5 copies. And so the next day we sold more, and the next day we sold more, and on the last day I sold out. And we were just like, oh my God. And like, when's the next one coming out? I'm like, well, I got 2 out now. I'll be back next year, hopefully. And we all went out for dinner at the end of the weekend. And Tracy said, let's just make it the 3 of us next year too. And I've been at Gen Con ever since. You know?
Not to take us outside of comics for a moment, but what you just described there, so many people are, you just hear the struggle of, we need a new audience. We need to get comics into other hands, the direct market, the comic shops. There is an audience there, and that's great. But we want
the gaming audience, the gaming, tabletop gaming, board gaming, and role-playing have done a phenomenal job at handing the torch to the next generation. Because getting into it feels like something you can do with the family, and it feels like something you can carry on and hand over to the kids. And they've done a phenomenal job. What's that?
Which comics seems to struggle with more for some.
I think comics seems to have a chip on its shoulder. They don't want to make kid content at the big 2 regularly, and they don't want to promote it in those circles, and they don't feel like it is. I don't want to speak for all the people. Obviously, there are people within the system that want to do it. But it feels like they're so uptight about being taken seriously that they forget that their core audience needs to be 10, 12, 13, 15-year-olds. Do you know what I mean? Instead of 20, 30, 40-year-olds. And I say that as a 40 plus, right?
But like Marvel and DC, I mean, Marvel used to do YA all the time. It was called Amazing Spider-Man, Uncanny X-Men,
absolutely,
the Avengers.
And you know, there would be some contentious content that you would feel like you were, I mean, it felt like a bit like Forbidden Fruit, where you were like, this, what is that cool word Stan Lee is using? I'm going to look it up in the dictionary. Or what is this, you know, the drug issue of Amazing Spider-Man, or you know, like they would hit these topics hard occasionally, or, you know, you would see more complex stuff, but that made you feel like you were an older kid, which is exactly what a younger kid wants.
Exactly. I mean,
you can't talk down to the audience. That never works. It never works.
I mean, Uncanny X-Men, this Dark Phoenix saga run, which got a lot of people into comics, a lot of kids. I mean, you did have that that feeling of most of it is definitely YA, and then they
Right.
go to the Hellfire Club and like, oh, what are people they're running around?
But Kitty Pryde was your way in. Like
Right.
every 13-year-old kid has a crush on Kitty Pryde because they imagine that they're on the X-Men with this cute girl or whatever. Like I don't know. It felt like it was really a way in. And Amazing Spider-Man was my favorite. I started voraciously collecting that. My first Marvel comic was G.I. Joe.
Yep.
Like
that's true for so many.
but you know what they did? At the end of those episodes of G.I. Joe, they would have the credits, and then right before the Hasbro logo, they would spin the latest cover of the comic, and they would say, "Buy the Marvel comic," and you would go, "Yes, master."
Yes.
And then you would go do what they said.
Yeah.
Like it was, I'm sure they had to stop doing it because it was probably illegal or something to advertise.
It was several years. The Transformers did it too. And it's one of those people like, why don't they advertise comics in these things? They did, and it was successful.
It was.
But something happened along the way too, because the same thing, like growing up, I'm a little younger, not that much younger, but I grew up, with like the Batman cartoon, the X-Men cartoon, and that got me to get into, oddly enough, Sonic the Hedgehog from Archie Comics got me into
whatever works. That's not
comics, and then I branched out from there.
As much as the Turtles were a thing for a lot of us, the Archie Turtles comic brought tons of people in the door.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but something happened. I don't know where, and I mean, this has always happened, but it seems more intense now, of thinking that stuff for kids or YA or middle grade is the only thing kids want is to be stuck in school with these characters.
Right.
And, like, I hated that. I wanted to read about adults. I wanted to do adult things.
I liked the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, and I liked the family dynamic. I liked those things. They made you feel like you were older. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Which is what every kid wants, rather than talking down to them. Yes, I liked teenage characters as well.
Yeah.
I liked New Warriors and all those things as they came out. But, Teen Titans, all that sort of stuff. I think you need to speak to the audience, in a way that treats them fairly and gives them the drama. That was my plan. We're jumping way ahead, so we're probably going to have to roll back. And that was my plan on Champions. When Tom Brevoort offered me Champions, Mark Waid was writing the book, and he was writing it with a view in terms of a younger audience that had captured a certain audience. And Tom said to me, Mark's doing his thing and that's fine. You don't have to do that thing, and I don't necessarily want you to do that same thing. I don't need you to try and be Mark. And I said, I can't be Mark, and I won't. I see this like I want to do, Perez Wolfman, like I want to do Teen Titans. And he said, bang, I'm totally down with that. Do Teen Titans, like classic, dramatic, intense. And so you can see the shift. Like as soon as I take over on Champions, we dig in on drama, we dig in on character, and like I start putting characters through the meat grinder, and a certain portion of the audience hated it because they're like, why do you hate these characters? I'm like, I don't hate these characters. I'm building drama. Like I'm making things hard on them, because in order to prove that they're worthy heroes, you have to make it hard. Do you know what I mean? If you treat them with kid gloves, they're not real Marvel heroes, So to me, it's like I crush them because I love them. I know that sounds weird or whatever. But my mistake with that was, in retrospect, I leaned into that so hard. The audience that was reading Champions, some of them dug it. I mean, our sales weren't completely apocalyptic, but some of them dug it. But a portion of them said, this is not for me. This guy hates Sam Alexander. He hates Riri Williams. He hates Miles Morales, Kamala, whoever was getting beat that issue because we were making it hard. And the audience that I felt we could capture that read Perez Wolfman or would dig it, they'd already in their mind given up on the book. They would never try it. And so my mistake was thinking I could capture them and hold the current audience, and we couldn't, because the people had already written it off. That the people that grew up on the books I did had already decided they weren't going to read it if they ever tried it. And the people that were reading it, they were like, why are you such an asshole? Like, why are you we're talking deep in my Marvel career now, so we've
sure.
leapfrogged.
No, this is
over
good.
all these things.
I like when the conversation just goes where it needs to go.
And yet we still, to this day, I have some absolute ardent fans of that run, and I have people who are picking up the trades now because they love Kamala and Miles and all those characters, and they're like, why the hell have I never seen this before? This is crazy. This is awesome. And I sort of, wistfully go, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I do. I'm really proud of the book, but it's in the rearview mirror now. There's nothing I can really do about it.
And not to, it's hard to wander into these topics without, people starting to point fingers at others. So that's not my intent here, but it's, what you just described though is common. It's this, we moved something, and then there was something missing in the marketing or it's like you mentioned.
We fell on I had a rough divide. So my problem was, and this is, again, I don't think anyone's fault intentionally. It was decided that they were trying to, near the end of Axel's run as editor-in-chief, from what I heard, they were trying to put the brakes on new number ones because it was getting overwhelming, right? And they had pumped the brakes so many times on that stuff that no one was paying attention anymore to the same degree. I don't want to. So I came on issue 19. That was. It was they were going to, like when Donnie came on Thanos, it was just another issue of Thanos. And it was like, you got to try and build momentum on a 19. And it was like, whew, okay, that's a rough prospect. But I will try, right? And so we hunkered down, and those first few issues did better than people expected. We introduced that new character, Snowguard, the Canadian superhero, sold out all across Canada. We had multiple printings on the book, and they were like, oh, this is doing better than we thought. Right as my first issue is coming out, CB takes over as editor-in-chief, and they say, we're going to do this, what was it called? Fresh Start Initiative, I think they called it. All these books are getting new number ones, right? I'm on the wrong side of that divide. I've already got 19, 20, 21 coming out. So what are you going to do? You're going to kick a new number one? And so we were getting really good coverage for a book that was 19, 20, 21. We were starting to win a couple people over. And to their credit, they wanted to bring more eyeballs to it. So then they said, okay, we are doing a new number one. And it was like, oh, damn. How can you do something really big on book to make it worth that number one?
And you weren't very many issues into it.
We had issue 20. Well, we did that school shooting issue 24.
Yeah, you were 7 issues in, and they relaunched it, I think.
Yeah, and so, the school shooting issue had a big press push, and then we had them go to Weird World, which was a pretty good push, and we were getting momentum. I feel like we were doing some good stuff. The only way I could think of to justify a new number one, I had like a 2-3 year plan. I looked at the end of year 2, and we were doing a Legion-esque kind of all the teen heroes. How many teen heroes can we pull from the past? How many new teen heroes can we generate in countries where there isn't a Marvel hero? Because that was another initiative that we had been talking about internally. And you saw that where they made that character, that South Asian character, Wave, and like all these other ones. They were making these new characters. Some of them they were making for the mobile games, and some of them they were making for... Marvel was trying to make these new international heroes. And I said, I want Champions to be a focal point for that. I'm going to make you new teen heroes every 5-6 months. And we're going to make them cool, and we're going to put them in these new places, and we'll get consultants in those places to make sure they feel genuine. And it's going to be awesome. So we had this Legion-esque kind of, plan. But the only way I could think of to get a new number one was to kind of push the fast forward button and go, it's happening now. You know what I mean? Like, look at all these characters. And it was very ambitious, ridiculously ambitious, because we were launching in January, which is not a good time to launch number one. And we had 15 characters in the book. And we're like, carrying the continuity of the previous run and a bunch of plot lines I really didn't want to let go of, but trying to make it new reader friendly, but trying to ignite new characters and trying to slam all this stuff together. It was, it seems obvious it wasn't going to work, but we were so hopeful and excited and trying to push the ball forward in a way that I felt like we could do something really special. And maybe it would be a little messy and it would be a bit of a rough ride, but we could get that momentum off a new number one and prove to people that these kids were worth following. And the reviews we got were real mixed, where people were like, there's too many characters, there's too much stuff. And other people were like, I liked it before, why are you doing this? And other people were like, oh, it's just Jim's continuing to torture these characters. And so on and so forth. And I couldn't disagree with some of what they were saying. I felt it too. Like I felt the pressure and there's too much going on. And then we got injected into War of the Realms, and it's like, all right, we got to juggle an event and we can do this. And it was just like, it was wild. Like it was an intense a ride. And so I felt like we were still going to be able to ride it out as we were entering into War of the Realms. And then we had a plan originally to tie into the Ultron stuff that Dan was doing in Iron Man. And so I had introduced a subplot at the end of our previous run where Sparky, Vision's dog, was injected with like a virus, and he was going to help Ultron. And I was starting to co-write Iron Man with Dan Slott. And so we were like, we're all going to tie this together. It's going to be so cool. And then the numbers just weren't there. Yeah. And so Tom called me up, and that Tom Brevoort has been in my corner for almost my entire Marvel career. And he always plays straight with me. And he was just like, it's not happening. Like we've got to shut her down. And I was heartbroken because I felt like that was a corner of the Marvel universe I could carve out. And I knew what little I know about the future of the MCU. And, there is a youthful push that's going to happen. It has to, because those actors are aging out. You know what I mean? There's a reason why Ms. Marvel is in their radar, why, and Spider-Verse did so well and all these things, because the thing that DC used to do in the 80s and 90s where they would have legacy characters, and Marvel never did that. Now it's all inverted. You know what I mean? Like now, because of the MCU, you have to hand off to this next set of actors and this next generation of heroes. And I'm like, I want to be on the spear tip of that. I want to be generating cool new stuff for that, because that 5-10 years from now, that's going to be the exciting new frontier that people are going to be freaking out about. And what if I had a cool omnibus of, look at all these cool youthful heroes and look at all the amazing things. And so I felt like that was going to be my niche at Marvel.
It's tough, though. I think you're running into so many things. You mentioned having to cross over the event. That's going to be a trick. What was going on with
everyone with the best of intentions, right? Like, I don't feel like no one was like trying to put the nail in this book. It was just a rough ride. We were on the wrong side of a new editor-in-chief divide. We were trying to get this book out into as many places as possible. We had this and it's a monthly book. The momentum is relentless. Yeah. So you plan and you plan and you plan, and then the plan gives way to reality, and you're like, okay. But part of being a professional is rolling with it. Being able to say, I will make the best of a crazy situation and still put out work that you're proud of,
You mentioned the thing too about the new number ones and all that, and Perch and I have talked about this before, and this has come up a lot, that we're at a point where it seems like that's really diminished, because there are so many number ones that come out now where you need to be informed with so much continuity that it doesn't really feel like you couldn't give a new number one to a new reader as it's here.
On the one hand, the books I loved growing up had deep, rich continuity, right? Yeah,
sure.
And I never felt like I needed a number one to start reading, and I didn't have trade paperbacks. Yeah. You just dropped into the middle of X-Men or into the middle of Avengers or Fantastic Four, and then you worked it out. And the little asterisks would come up, would say, back in issue 220, this happened. And if you grab that back issue, great. But otherwise, you knew what the motivation was. I think there's a different mentality now where people want to have a completist mindset. Mm-hmm. And I get that. You can't really change people's habits to want to see, well, where's the start? You're like, of Amazing Spider-Man? You're like, it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
And it's not like manga where you can just look on the shelf and go, volume 1 of Naruto, and then just follow it all the way through or whatever. Like, it's a very different publishing model and a very different system with hundreds of creators, right? So, yeah.
It's done in that way, but like you're saying, like the habit used to be completely different. The habit used to be exactly what you were saying. It was to the publisher's detriment to put out a number 1. They would come up with excuses to start 4, well into the run instead of.
But you can't you can't navel gaze and say, well, it was better in the 80s, so therefore we should try to do it like the 80s. Like, I get it, and I feel the pressures from all different sides. And you as a creator, when you come on a title, no one is clamoring and going, yeah, can I have number 19? Like, not because I care about it on I'm writing Conan the Barbarian right now.
Mm-hmm.
To me, if you look on my bio on my website, I don't even write the number. I write the legacy number. Right. Because in my head, that's what matters. On my Avengers books, on my Iron Man stuff I co-wrote with Dan, I am the big dweeb that has the legacy number, because to me, that's the real number.
Sure.
But to the retailer and to the reader, it's something else.
Well,
right?
but there seems to be evidence that like retailers aren't even into that, and a lot of fans, because it ends up getting confusing.
Until they are, though. Like, for every example of a book that, I feel like, there's definitely diminishing returns on hitting the reset button over and over again on the same title. But there are definitely examples where you generate hype and you go, this is a clear, clean jumping on point, as if you're smart about it.
I think it's easier to market. I think, and so I think that's what's going on. Is that it is a little bit easier in a world of a lot of titles being pushed out. And one of the things Joe and I have also talked about a lot is you're pumping out in some cases like 80 books a month, and so your attention is going to be split. Your staff is small, and so some of these things become it's easier to wrap your head around a number 1, but I think we're entering this new era or this new phase. You mentioned the 80s, and by the way, part of the reason why that worked is because you had the newsstand, and there is just not the same way today,
right? And
then I think we had a phase where the number 1s and some of these relaunches were helpful. It was people are catching on. It feels like a couple of years ago we entered into this third world where it's kind of this messy mix of the two.
I feel like the problem is that you can't divorce yourself from the legacy of the books, but because it's one of your strengths of these shared universes. But on the other hand, you need, this ability to give people a ground floor entry way into it. And so how do you do that, right? And it's different for each creative team. Some of the creative teams jettison a lot of that stuff. Some of them give little nods to it, and some of them just go, man, it's basically another issue. Like, it's just same as it ever was. And as a reader and as a huge fan of the shared experiment of the Marvel Universe, I love continuity and I love doing right by it. I reference a lot of old storylines in my comics. When I wrote Uncanny Avengers, I would love to find these little synergies of the past and bring them back up. There's an issue where Wonder Man and the Beast are sitting around an Irish pub kind of lamenting over their messed up careers. And you have all that classic kind of montage of all their stupidity of decades worth of books. And to a certain reader, that might push them away. But to me, I love that stuff, and it feels very warm to know that things have happened before and things are continuing to happen to these characters. But you need to strike a balance and never give people so little information that they can't understand their current motivations.
Some of that's got to be in like the marketing of this too, though, because I mean, like, I've never met anyone who picked up the first trade of like Frank Miller's Daredevil Omnibus and trades are just like, this starts at 158. I can't read this. I got to read 1 to 157. No one goes, Grant Morrison's X-Men starts at 114. I can't read this. So there's got to be a combination of these things. I mean, Hush, undeniable mega seller in trade when it was coming out.
Sure.
like it seems like there part of the problem might be too many things are being tried out at once, so it's hard to determine which one's working and which one isn't.
Yeah, there's a lot, and part of it's your trade paperback program and your branding. Part of it is advertising. Part of it is making, the problem with putting out so many books is that it's so much signal to noise ratio, right? Where you're trying, what is the one, we talked about this at when I was doing Wayward. So I did, in 2014, I launched a creator-owned book called Wayward. We ended up doing 30 issues, 6 trade paperbacks. The book has continued to sell very well in trade.
Excellent series, by the way.
Yeah, no,
thank you.
Great.
My favorite of your stuff.
Thanks. In single issues, it did really well, till we hit that crest off point where you've just got so much, like we have more trade readers overall, but single issues, we still did well through almost the entire run. Near the end, of course, your numbers are dwindling, but you're also coming to the end and people are picking up trades and hardcovers and the whole 10 yards. But with that book and in and around it, one of the discussions was, and it sounds really corny, like there can only be, at that point in time, it felt like 1 or 2 Image hot books a month. But if Image was putting out 6 books, 4 of those are going to fall in the dust.
Right.
So you're trying to negotiate this weird sort of thing of like, I want to be this week's hot book from Image. Do you know what I mean? Oh, There's only going to be 2 of them in a month. I need to be one of them, right? And of course, everyone wants to be that one. But you're sort of like, when I looked at the schedule and I was sort of like, okay, I'm going to be at this convention. We're going to launch on that weekend. So I can make that a big deal. I can work with the convention to get a convention exclusive. So now I've got a bunch of extra eyeballs on it. And we're at the end of con season. They've already kind of blew their load on all these other cool books. I can come in, like split the difference between the summer and the fall. I'm thinking about this as marketing. I'm thinking about this as hype and all this other kind of stuff because I believe in the book and because I know what's there. And then you magnify that dozens of times for Marvel, right? Because it's not just 2 books a month. It's 20 launches or 20 number ones or whatever. And it's relentless, right?
Yeah.
And every creative team wants to be on the crest of one of those cool announcements, one of those amazing releases, one of those, but you also don't want to poise them off against each other. Like you're trying to find little spaces for everyone to breathe.
A lot of plates in the air. I mean, I also, and I mean no disrespect to anyone else who's working in the industry, but I mean, just listening to you talk and reading your blogs, you do think through many of these aspects.
I try to, but you've got to keep in mind, that's only on my creator-owned books.
Sure.
So if I'm doing a book at Marvel or IDW or anywhere else, I'm working with other people and I'm saying, here's what I think. This doesn't mean my advice is the right answer, but here's what I think. So you can say to the powers that be, I don't think this is going to work. I don't think launching this way or relaunching is going to work. But at the end of the day, I will follow you because you're the guys signing the checks. And, you also know more. You've been doing this longer than I have. I have to trust at some point that it's going to work. And sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, I think there's no one piece of advice I know that works for everyone. There's different scenarios. The world's always shifting and everything else. But you're thinking through the problem. And I've talked to enough other creators who it's like a revelation. Either when I show them your blog or we talk through some of these things, it's like I hadn't thought about it that way before. And it's the thought process. More the thought process than the answers.
And I think the willingness to talk about it. I think some creators, they want to be siloed. Like if you're a writer, they just tell me when the script is due. And you're like, dude, that's cool. But your job, you have to know what the artist's job is in order to be an effective writer. You have to know what the letterer's job is to be an effective writer. You have to know what the editor's job is. One of the reasons I think I keep getting hired, and I'm not saying this to puff myself up, I'm just being as honest as possible. I have been an editor and an assistant at Udon. I knew how much of a pain in the ass that was.
Yes.
And so if I can make your job easier, you will want to work with me again.
Right.
Something as simple as organizing the reference properly, or, I would be doing a monthly book, and as soon as I got the first deadline for solicits, some editors want you to write the solicits, some don't. Every editor is a little different. As soon as you would give me a date that says, on this Friday, I need the solicit text, I put in my Google Calendar every month an alert 2 days before that says they're going to want solicit text. So I would send solicit text ahead of time, and the editor would go, "My God, I haven't even asked you for it yet."
Yeah.
And I go, "Yeah, but it's a monthly book, dude. Like, that's kind of how it works, right?" Like,
absolutely. I mean,
that little, I just saved 2 emails back and forth.
Yes.
Guess who gets thought of fondly? Do you know what I mean?
No,
or you tell me, hey, there's an event coming up, tie-in books. Send me all the documentation. And in the documentation, it tells me some obscure piece of character continuity. I go research it. And then I come back and I say, you know what? You could do this. And they're like, oh, you did the homework. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, man. Because A, I love this stuff. And B, I want to. So if you read Mystery in Madripoor, that was the Hunt for Wolverine miniseries I did.
Yep.
That was like my love letter to Claremontian kind of caper stories.
Yep.
It's got Madripoor in it. It's got all this weird kind of noirish stuff and double crosses and psychic battles and lusty characters wanting each other. Like it is me trying to be Chris Claremont as much as possible while still being me. And I'm really proud of that book. And then we had the added bonus of the editorial came to us and said, each of these miniseries for Hunt for Wolverine should have some sort of surprise. What is it? You tell us. And it was like, okay. And so I threw out the long bomb and I said, I want to put Betsy back in her British body. And the first thing we got was, oh, hell no. Like, we're not touching that with a 10-foot pole. That is just that's a third rail. That's electric. It's going to go over badly. And I was like, no, there's a way to do it. And I just kept throwing ideas. And, the thing that Brevoort talked about with like Winter Soldier, where Brubaker brought the idea of let's bring Bucky back. And he says, oh, hell no, you can't do that because this. And then Brubaker slowly figured out how to fill in all those holes. Mm-hmm. And so they said, you can't do that with Betsy because this. And I said, but. And then we just slowly kind of shuffled the board until it worked. Mm-hmm. So, and so I feel like that book is in some ways, it can be a bit of a hard read if you're not a long-loved X-Men fan. But I also feel like everyone's motivations are really clear. Mm-hmm. This character wants this, and this character is opposed by that, and they, got to stop them. So there's like an A plot that's very basic. No, and then there's the B plot is emotionally all these other pieces flying around and old loyalties and trust and distrust,
I mean, the book was received very well. It was during this awkward time in the X-Men where there was very mixed messages going out to the market in general.
Right. Well, because behind the scenes, obviously Hickman was working away at things. What was funny was now people will message me and they'll be like, "Why did you?" I had people conspiracizing around it where they would say, why did you carry water for that storyline? Like, why would you enter that snake pit of trying to fix Betsy, And I was like, no, I thought it was cool. And they're like, no, that must have been a top-down decision. No, that was me just excitedly telling them what I thought would be a cool payoff. Yeah. And now they've carried it forward and done what Marvel's supposed to do, where you carry the baton for a while, and then I hand it to someone else, and they said, you know what, she should be Captain Britain. And I'm like, go for it. If you can make it work, you're the next part in the chain. Hopefully it works out for you, And if at some point they say, here's the baton back, what would you do? Then I got to incorporate Captain Britain or whatever else and take it to the next place. That's how it used to work, I feel like.
Yeah. Speaking of how things used to work, I want to kind of keep jumping around. Sure. You were coming up at Image, with Skullkickers and all that at a time where it seemed like, and I know this isn't like everyone's experience, but for the most part, it seemed like people were coming up in Image for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, Walking Dead, these number ones were blowing up and getting creators like you attention.
Yeah.
You had other people, I think, like, around then within a few years, like Michael Marici, Justin Jordan, kind of Joshua Williamson on like the tail end of that.
Right.
And then
the New 52 happened and a bunch of people got snapped up there.
You had this kind of, it almost felt like Image around then was starting career, like starting people that went to the big two. And now by the mid 2010s to now, for the most part, there's obvious people like, Donnie Cates and stuff that this doesn't apply to, but it seemed like it's almost the other way, that it's like people like, Rick Remender built a big audience and then took it. Ed Brubaker built a big audience and took it to Image. Right. And so, like, since you were like, on the ground floor for all that stuff, like, do you have any insights into like what was going on and what kind of made that sea change happen?
I mean, I feel like, there are still lots of exciting opportunities at the big two to be able to make things and to be able to do things. And I think people go into those relationships, work for hire relationships, with a lot of preconceived notions.
Yeah.
And I can't say I have none, because that would be a lie.
Everybody
but because I've been involved with the corporate stuff, thanks to Udon and all that, much earlier, I got my eyes, I think, a little bit wider open, where it's like I'm not expecting a gold pocket watch and all that kind of stuff. Like I love doing the books. I really do. I love working on these characters and these worlds that have meant so much to me. Mm-hmm. But I also know that cannot be the sum totality of what I'm going to be creating, and that I have no ownership of those things. So I have to keep my foot in this other, in creator owned. And I feel like people, I think it's getting better now, but people have this weird mental stigma, like you are the corporate stooge, or you are this independent, go get them, give the middle finger to the businesses and off you go. And it's like, no, that's not it. Like it's about, making choices that work for you and making the books that you're, and I can be proud of a book in either realm. I just know which ones I get final decision on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you're careful about it, Tom said something in one of his editorial YouTube videos recently. He was talking about working with freelancers and all this. And the wording is going to be off because I didn't commit it perfectly to memory, but something to the gist of, he says, we are benefiting from the creative work of these people, and they are benefiting from the broad brand that we represent. And that is what it is, right? From now on, the word Avengers and Conan the Barbarian and Iron Man are associated with my name if I choose to use it. Yeah. Right? I can't claim I created those things, but I am now involved in the legacy of those things. And that opens doors for me. That provides opportunities for me. Is it commensurate with, if Marvel takes a character that I created and makes $1 billion, would I like some of that? Sure. Absolutely. I would be stupid to say otherwise. But on the other hand, I can now pitch any comic publisher in North America, and they will return my calls pretty quickly. You know what I mean? That isn't to say roll out the red carpet every single time, but like we're going to talk and we're going to figure this thing out. And it's in their best interest to listen to my idea and figure out if this is going to be a good fit or not. And if I go to an artist and I say, hey, your work is amazing, we should do a book together, I can tell you with 90% accuracy, this thing's getting published. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to happen. It's really incumbent on us to make the thing, not is there a home for it?
It's definitely a benefit. I mean, and Sean Murphy's mentioned the same thing. Obviously, he's people are asking all the time, when you do your own thing, do you hate working for the corporation, etc.? And it's like, again, I'm also paraphrasing, but it's, Batman put him on the map.
Right. You work for Marvel, but you work for people, right? Absolutely. And within that company, there are editors that I have gotten along phenomenally well with. I can't actually say I've had terrible interactions with any editor there. There are some that I think I sync up better with.
Sure.
Like there are some that are working methodology. I'm like, oh, you get me. Okay, this is going to go real well. And Tom's one of those people. Mark Basso in the Conan office is one of those people. Like we sync up really, really well. Yeah. Some of them I haven't had a chance to work with yet, and I would like to find out if we've got a good. Same thing at DC. Like, I would love to work with whatever, Ben Abernathy or whoever. Like, those are people that I feel like, oh, I've gotten along well with them at a convention, hanging out, chatting over beers. It would be cool to see what we could build. You know what I mean? But you just don't know. But you need to go into it with the understanding that you're working with people, and those people have goals in and around a corporate structure and all that sort of thing. And my job, I'm going to try and big picture this, is to communicate, to entertain, right?
Right.
Part of that is including communicating with editorial. If I get Tom Brevoort on board my idea and he believes it's the right idea, the field opens up. The thing will happen.
Yeah.
If I'm not communicating well enough or entertaining him, I know that sounds weird, but like proving to him that this could work, then I got to go back and retool it, or I've got to, or they're going to hire someone who's a bigger name or whatever. Like, and you need to kind of get that in your head. Yeah. Instead of getting a chip on your shoulder and getting super angry and being like, why won't they give me Wolverine? It's like, why should they give you Wolverine?
Yeah.
Why you instead of someone else? And that's not to say that their decision making is flawless or that they are always going to pick the perfect team, but you need to convince them in a way that makes perfect sense that they're like, yeah, man, Donny Cates is the guy. You got to give him the next big book. Look at the numbers. Look at the fan excitement. Look at the, whatever it might be. Or Josh Williamson, or, pick a creator, Becky Cloonan, like whatever, right?
I love it. And for a lot of people who listen, and I know, and we're not going to get into it, but this kind of angst that comes with a lot of the customers and the fans of like, why aren't they like me? I mean, there's this debate that goes on.
Sure.
But what you just described, I think everyone can relate to. If you've got a job, whatever that job is, being able to communicate where you're coming from, being able to get trust from management, being able to prove yourself.
And that's not instantaneous.
No, you just don't walk in the door with that.
I explained it to a friend of mine who's just starting to get Big 2 work now. And I said, you have to think of it like building up creative credit and then spending it. So I build up credit with the editors that I work with, trust and reliability and all those things. And then every so often, not that I intend to do this, there comes a time where you need to spend it, where you say, I can't say the exact book. They wanted to put a cover artist on a book I was doing. I do not like that person's art, and I feel like it would be a detriment to the sales of the book.
For sure.
And yes, that person has an audience, but I couldn't round it. Like in my head, it wasn't happening. And it's like, I have been a good soldier. I have done all the proper things. I have delivered the goods. And I knew this was not something I wanted over email. Call up the editor and have a heart-to-heart conversation. Go, I can't. Like, can we not do this? Please, please, please. And they were surprised because I don't tend to cause a lot of waves.
Yeah.
But it's like, I built up the credit. I built up the trust. I'm telling you, this is not going to work for these reasons. And every time I social media and I have to put this person's cover, I'm going to be wincing. I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh, you really feel that strongly about it?" I'm like, "I really feel that strongly about it."
Now,
okay, let's not do it. And
you
it's
laid out your case in a professional way, and I got to ask you.
But after I do that, I can't have another ask next week. I can't just turn around and go, "You know what else you should do?" Like that's just not how it's going to work.
But, so I think I already know the answer. But so the other side of this, let's say you called up professionally, you gave all these things to your editor, and it's like, I hear your case, but it's important to it. We're going to do it anyway.
Right. It's a done deal.
It's a done deal. Now at that point, I'm assuming you take social media, you throw a tantrum, you burn on this.
You got it. Yeah, you just got to. You got to eat shit. Like you just sort of go, okay. Like the difference, of course, being the part that I control, the story. I still control. What's between those covers. I still know what's going to be. When that letterproof comes through, that's what I have control over. You know what I mean? And so there are times when there is a book that I did early on in my career at Marvel, and I was not thrilled with the art. And when we had a fill-in artist, our reviews jumped up. And people were like, now the book's coming together. This writing's no longer sucky. And it's like, dude, it's the exact same scripts. It's the exact same story. But the artist has such a huge role to play in how you perceive that story. Absolutely. And a line of dialogue that may seem really corny is going to seem really sincere if there's a beautiful chunk of art, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. Something that seems real, and you can't control some of that, Yeah. And so you have to, I can't throw my artist under the bus publicly. That's insane, right? Sure. Right. But on the other hand, it's like internally I know what I have control over and what I don't have control over. And sometimes editorial can see it too. And there were people that were going to bat for me and being like, yeah, this book's a real rough ride, but that's not Jim. Yeah. Jim's good. Let's put him on something bigger, better. Let's do this, right? And again, someone like Tom Brevoort, who's been in my corner, I get put on Avengers, and then we do No Surrender, that weekly book. Mm-hmm. Like, what an incredible opportunity. We get to do 16 weekly issues. It goes over really well. Pepe Larraz is coming into his own, and he explodes on that book. We got just like a murderer's row of talent on it. And I get to work with Al Ewing and Mark Waid, mm-hmm. and we build this elaborate, crazy, epic Avengers story. Well, what is my background? I'm a project manager. So one of the things I knew was, God, a weekly book is a nightmare. We have to front load so much stuff. And so I kind of grabbed hold of a bunch of it and said, okay, we need to structure this like crazy. And we had gone and done an in-person summit at the Marvel office. It was an amazing experience. One of my favorite creative experiences ever. We go back home and everyone's a little bit paralyzed because no one knows how to start. Mm-hmm. And I called up Tom and I said, I don't want to like hunker down on Al and Mark and tell them how to do their job, but I think no one knows how to start page 1, panel 1. Like, everyone else is waiting for someone else to grab the steering wheel. Can I do a pacing breakdown? We have this many pages, I think 30 pages in the first issue. Here's, based on our outline that is approved, here's how many pages I think each of these scenes take. And then everyone can tear it apart and rearrange it. Nice. And Tom goes, I would really appreciate that.
It's going to earn you so much credit.
Right. So I paced out issue 1 and I sent it to the gang. And Mark responds with, looks good, I'll do my scenes. And I was like, what? I thought we were going to like back and forth it. And Mark was like, no, I don't see any problems. The page turns all make sense. And that scene seems like enough panels for me to do what I need to do. And you picked it based on characters we were writing. So the lead character in that scene is mine. So clearly it's a scene I should write. And so out of those 16 issues, I paced 13 of them. Mm-hmm. So if you like No Surrender, it's my fault. And if you hate No Surrender, it's my fault. Right? So and that was our working methodology on the book. Most of the issues I pasted out, and then everyone sort of broke it down and said, okay, these scenes make sense. Every so often they would say, I need an extra page, or can we steal from Peter to pay Paul, or whatever. And we got it worked out. But for the most part, the book is, it's sort of like a Jim Zub paced book. Like, this is based on our outline. And then it went so well. We wrote 15 of those 16 issues, 2 weeks an issue. We had a huge lead time on the book. Wow. And when it was all done, we were heading into the final issue, and it was our epilogue issue. The big payoff of the story is in actually part 15, but we had so many plot lines we needed to sort of send people off to the series they were going to be doing next, because Jason was launching Avengers, the number 1. All of our characters were diffusing out to a bunch of other places, or in some cases going into limbo. And so we wanted to give them a little, denouement, like we wanted to finish it out. So we had a whole issue for the epilogue. And I looked at the epilogue and I actually got a little choked up and I said, I don't think I can get this done in 2 weeks. I need more time with it because this might be my last chance to write the Avengers. And Tom was like, well, I'll tell you a little secret. I assumed you guys were going to be late for a bunch of this. We have 9 extra weeks on the schedule that you didn't use. Yeah, I can give you an extra week.
Oh, man.
And it was like the best compliment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the day that part 16 came out, we got real amazing congratulations from everyone on the Marvel team. And we got a letter from Dan Buckley that included a pack of cards I've got here by my desk. So this is, you can't see this on camera, unfortunately, but this is a set of cards that they printed for us. Everyone on the creative team got a Grandmaster deck.
Wow.
That's
that
awesome.
only the creative teams have. And it's with this letter from Dan Buckley that says, you guys are upholding the Marvel Universe and all this stuff. And the day that issue came out, Tom sent an email around and goes, you guys want to do it again? And we started planning what would be No Road Home like a month later.
No.
Yeah.
That's some awesome. I don't remember hearing a lot of this story. This is some awesome.
Yeah, it was so cool. It was one of the best creative experiences I've ever had. It was just, everyone was in sync and we all knew what we wanted to do. And we were all so passionate about the characters, you know? And I have like a dozen stories of just the summit sitting around the table and shooting the shit and making jokes and building up trust with each other. You know? Yeah, it was so cool.
I want to be very respectful of your time because I said we do about an hour and we're way over that. So
Sure.
But if do you have time for like one more question? Then I feel like I'm going to have to bribe you to talk to you again sometime.
Yeah, I feel like because part of the problem is we were sort of moving in a logical order of here's my career, and then we just leapfrog deep into the superhero end of things. But it's been cool because there's also some great stories. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, this is when people listen to this is what they like to have, just a free flowing conversation. So it's,
and I feel like there is thematically some stuff carrying through, even if we're tripping through time. Where if someone looks at a calendar, they're going to be like, "Okay, they were here and now they're here." Like, okay,
no, it's
how did he get to Avengers from Skullkickers? What just happened?
I think what's the theme that, I mean, hopefully the people who are listening pick up on is just this creation of comics. There's just so many misconceptions about how it's done, what's going on, and we're hearing a lot of different pieces here. I wanted to ask about Wayward, selfishly, because I love that series. It is.
I do too.
You know, again, no offense to anything else you've done. It is my favorite.
It means a lot to me. Stephen Cummings is another guy that I work with at Udon. We worked very closely there on dozens of projects over at Udon. We built up a really good friendship, and he lives in Japan. He lives in Yokohama. He's married. He's got kids like that. You know, that's his life is Japan. And so we had put together, and this ties back into that sort of creative neuroses, like I want to make stuff. One of the books that we put together at Udon is this kind of obscure book called Vent. And it was called Vent because we were all venting our creative ideas. So the book is filled with a bunch of tutorials and pinups and little short stories. It's just us all being creative, and everything is creator owned, and we're just jamming a bunch of ideas. And I did because my background's in art and animation, I did a pinup in there for a kind of a YA graphic novel I still want to do someday that I've never done. And Steven did a pinup of that girl, Ayane, standing at the top of the stairs with all the cats looking at you. That very, very iconic cover for Wayward #1. Yep. But it wasn't called Wayward, and that character didn't have a name. It was just a really cool pinup. And I looked at him. I saw it come in because I was the editor on that book, because I was organizing all of our creative ideas. And what I wanted to do was use that book as a launching platform to convince Eric, the owner of Udon, look at all this cool stuff. Let's make all of it. Selfishly, including mine, right? And Steven had that pinup, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I just told him how great it looked. It was just black and white. It wasn't even colored. And, we didn't end up making any of that stuff from that book. But years later, I do Skullkickers. Skullkickers is doing well. I'm getting a name as a writer. I start doing work for hire writing for Dynamite. I did the Pathfinder comic based on the tabletop role-playing game. That proved to people I could deliver on team books and that I was monthly. And right around that time, I think maybe a little bit later, Steven was wrapping up some stuff at Udon, and he's like, man, I love doing this work for Eric, but I need to do creator-owned stuff. How did you make the jump? And I was like, I just, this lucky opportunity at PopGun and all this stuff, but I just started making stuff. And I said, whatever happened to that concept you wanted to do? Did you ever make anything for it? He's like, no. He said, but I want to do like Japanese ghost stories. I want to do like stories in Tokyo. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, because in Tokyo doesn't look like how you see it in the movies. And it doesn't look like how you see it in even in manga. Sometimes it's all really hokey and corny, and it's really bad in North American comics. Like it's like ninjas and temples, or it's Akihabara and neon. Like it's and those are tiny slivers of Japan, but they're not the real Japan.
Right.
And at the same time, I was working on a fantasy story. I was generating ideas for this modern supernatural story that was like, what if the heroes of old were now, which has been done a million times. But I was like, I wanted to put a different kind of spin on it. I wanted to really dig down in some of the ecology of, like, if there's a unicorn running around modern day, how does it stay hidden and all this sort of stuff. And I realized that idea would be really hokey if we did European supernatural, the Germanic and all the stuff that you've seen 100 times, a basilisk and a dragon and all that crap. But what hadn't been done extensively was yokai.
Right.
And I was like, Steve, I kind of got a thing that is real amorphous right now, really vague. And you've got a thing. And I think we just bring those together and there's something here. And originally, we just started jamming character ideas. We just started coming up with, like, if these were the New Mutants or the X-Men, but they had powers that felt very different from what you see, and that's where we started coming up with the different characters and how their powers worked. And then I started tying them back into the yokai stuff. And then I just started deep diving on research, really hardcore, and kind of building out the world and building out the characters and how does their power exemplify their foibles and, your classic kind of stuff, but in the context of Japan. And Stephen and I would jump on these calls and just talk for hours about stuff, about the city and about neighborhoods. And I had traveled to Japan multiple times with Eric from Udon when we were negotiating deals with Capcom or Konami or other companies. We went to the Tokyo Video Game Conference one year, and it was mind-blowing. Like, I had been to Japan multiple times, and I had watched tons of anime and manga, but it was like, we got to get past the veneer. I want to try and find something richer. And we just struck gold with it. Like, I could feel that we had something really special. And so I put together that pitch, and there is no way for me to say this without sounding like a cocky bastard. I got almost every publisher I sent that pitch to, we got will you publish it here? So I got contracts from almost every creator-owned publisher in North America, and I got to sit down with them side by side and compare them.
That's rare. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, you name, a publisher, they were interested in it. It felt like a Hollywood thing where you take it around town.
Yeah.
Because that pinup was so evocative and his designs were so good. And this idea of, kids love anime, and it was like X-Men in Japan. Like, it was, the New Mutants in Japan. Like, it was really Buffy in Japan. Like, these were the things that we were talking about. And all of a sudden it was like, yeah, we had the tiger by the tail. We could do what we wanted. And I looked at all the contracts, and Image still had the best deal in town. And so I ended up contacting Eric and just saying, we want to do it at Image. And he was like, when do you start? Like, that, what do you need from us? And that gave us the ability to, for example, like I talked about before, leverage when we were launching, or, incentive stuff or advertising, or allowed us to be able to pick our battles a little bit better and make the book exactly the way we wanted to make it.
It's a great book. It's one that I just isn't known enough. I think as in this current world of manga getting kind of this new rise of popularity in the West, this is something you ought to check out if you haven't seen it. I'll tell you something. I don't know if you know this or not, but I know for a fact that I'm visiting one of the very large game companies in Japan. There were copies of Wayward in these companies that they're using. In particular, Najima-san, who was the story writer for Final Fantasy 15.
Amazing. That's very cool.
Yeah.
That is very cool. Yeah, we went to Japan and did a bunch of promotion over there. One of the things I did that is still, Steven put together a doujinshi and sold it at Comiket, which was gargantuan, crazy, we actually did really well with it. Like, even though there's never been a formal Japanese release, we have a bit of a cult kind of status over there, which is really fun. We've been printed in multiple languages now, but Japanese weirdly isn't one of them yet. But yeah, it's really, really proud of the book, and Stephen and I really learned a lot. And it's the best kind of creator-owned project where you're being indulgent about something you're passionate about, and it comes through in the energy on the page, and it proves some of like you enhance your skills because of it. You know what I mean? That's what a good creator-owned book should do. It's an unfettered ability for you to make choices that will make you a better creator. And then ideally you bring those things you've learned to everything else you do, you know?
It's a great book. Again, Jim, I want to be respectful of your time, but
no worries. We didn't even touch on D&D. That's the craziest part of all.
I can't believe it. We started. We had another interview where we started with D&D recently, and I had meant to bring it up, but there were so many things I didn't even get a chance to. I was like, oh, I got to ask that, and then like
we barely talked about Conan. It's crazy.
Yeah,
we're totally gonna have to do a part two.
Can we get you on again? Can we talk to you again at some point in the future?
That'd be fun. Because I feel like I've done a lot of interviews, but we've talked about some stuff, particular times in my career that generally I haven't. Like the webcomic stuff, I usually don't talk very much about.
Yeah,
it's wonderful. Well, there's so much more to do, and I think getting people more understanding is what I try and do and fail half the time too. So please just look at Jim's website. You'll get the
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate the enthusiasm, and the readers genuinely make this such a joy. I know there can be animosity about the stuff. I haven't seen very much of that. You know what I mean? The vast majority of the interactions I have with people is wonderful. And one of the things I've said to even other professionals, they get super angry when people get angry at them. I said, you know why they're angry, right? Because they're passionate, because they care so much about these characters. And that doesn't mean that their opinion is right or your opinion is right. It just means, man, remember when no one was paying attention to your stuff?
Exactly.
I'm not saying therefore take all the arrows. There are definitely times where people go over the line.
Absolutely.
But man, they're paying attention. Like they really care. They really when people were slinging mud at me about some of the stuff I was doing to some of the champions, and I had to occasionally, take a step back and go, they love those kids. And I do too. And I need to prove to them why they need to keep reading. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's part of the job. So
it is. Jim, thank you so much. And Joe, thank you for
thank you. I guess the next one will have to be a sword and sorcery focused with Conan and D&D.
We're all D&D.
We have to part to it. Absolutely. So thank you everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Sweet.